Hi AOTA members! Today we're going to review resumes. We're going to review the basics of the resume by going through items to typically include in it, and then we're going to look at 3 different resumes from applicants. These are fake people. I can't emphasize that enough. This is not drawn from any real applicant I've ever encountered. Let's remember that our resumes are typically the first way that a company screens applicants. How a clinician drafts their resume reveals characteristics to employers intentionally or unintentionally. It'll give employers an idea of somebody's attention to detail, their comfort or exposure to technology, organizational tendencies, and how effectively a candidate can communicate. Let's start by reviewing industry standards for resumes with therapy candidates. Items to include in your resume. Obviously your full name and contact information, and this should be done in an email or a phone number, preferably both. You want to include credentials, your licensure, experience, education, and professional affiliations, which could include memberships and any type of community involvement you have. Ideally, clinicians should be updating their resumes yearly as they achieve their professional goals. Updating your resume or CV yearly ensures that you're capturing the details of your year. As you apply to new jobs or opportunities, you can choose to cut or alter whatever is in your resume or CV. Yearly additions and edits also ensure that you're editing a document continuously and during periods of leisure, not when you're rushed to apply to a job or you're worried about the job application online closing. When we're rushed, we're more likely to miss details of our year, and we're also likely to make common mistakes like spelling errors, odd drafting, funny wording, or when spell check catches one word and changes it to a different one, like posters for posture or something like that. When drafting your resume, remember that the person completing the initial or screening phase may not be a therapist. The initial reviewer may not have any healthcare background whatsoever. Oftentimes, the initial reviewer completing the screening process is part of HR, so the extent of their healthcare knowledge is just working in the HR department or being stationed at a healthcare facility. With this in mind, make sure that you draft your resume in a way that is readable for the generic population, and also avoid using 3-letter abbreviations because individuals that aren't part of the healthcare network might not be familiar with them. In the similar vein, a computer automated system may progress your resume or not based on the presence of keywords. So oftentimes, if it's a very large organization or it's someone that's national, it's not actually a human reviewing your resume initially. It'll actually check the document for key terms and then either push that resume forward or not. Clinical positions, management positions, and educational opportunities each require different emphasis. Remember to edit your CV and your resume based on what position you're applying for. Now let's review a few resumes to get an idea for the do's and don'ts of resume writing. Our first resume to review is Jane Doe. Jane appears to be a new grad looking for her first clinical job. Then we have John Doe. John Doe has been out of school for some time. And then finally, we have Amy Lamb, who, as we all know, is the current president of the AOTA. Her CV comes to us courtesy of Creighton University's faculty website. Full disclosure, every once in a while, when I'm just feeling curious or trying to craft my own career goals or maybe taking some time to reflect on what I want to accomplish, I'll search for the resumes or CVs of poignant either clinical leaders or leaders that are in C-suite positions. And I started doing this when I first left school to get an idea of how to make my resume look. And over time, I've actually continued to do this because as you reflect on what you want for yourself professionally, it can give you a good idea of how the individual that you're looking up decided to craft their career or what inspired them. Just remember when you do this, comparison is the thief of joy, and you're only human. Not everybody can accomplish everything that's out there, and we all just have to do our best to reach our goals. Let's take a look at Jane Doe's opportunities for improvement. First, I'd like to point out her name and contact information. This should be more dominant and draw the reader's eye. Typically, I'm looking for something that's bold, centered, and larger text. I also would recommend that she get a professional email, especially if you're a new grad. Consider getting an email that is not your school address. If you want reviewers to consider your experience and not your age, you don't want to be emphasizing the current university you are part of. A university email address can scream inexperience. Having a possible birth year in your email address can also indicate your age. So if you want to avoid any maybe unintentional discrimination based on age, it's important to avoid that. I would also recommend that individuals avoid any cutesy email addresses. This is just kind of a personal thing. Some people don't mind and they get a kick out of it because it demonstrates somebody's personality, so completely your call. Next, let's look at her education section. I would say avoid listing your GPA unless it was perfect. It would be more fruitful for a reviewer if you put that maybe that you were in the top 10% of your graduating class, you graduated cum laude, or something along those lines. Some people may disagree with me, but I don't necessarily think graduation year is essential, although it is common in the industry to write it. Again, if you're really concerned about being kicked out of an interview process based on having graduated long ago or incredibly recent, it might behoove you to leave this off. I would also recommend individuals that completed substantial amounts of research or had a full thesis. I would say list your thesis title, who your PI was, and explain your capstone project, etc. This really gives an idea to the reviewer about what your passions were back then. You can also really dive into that for examples during the interview process. Let's look at Jane's work experience. She should only include relevant positions. If you're going to demonstrate leadership skills, company tenure, or other features of your work history, consider placing these roles after your clinical experience. Work history can be listed in reverse chronological order or by relevance to the position you're applying for. I always recommend that people describe roles, responsibilities, and company if it's not well known as part of your clinical experience. For example, if you worked in a really specialized healthcare field, or if you worked at a rehab hospital that maybe is quite small but is really uniquely designed, like a facility that's intergenerational care, you're going to want to describe what that is, because just like we talked about before, the first person that interviews you may not be clinical at all, and it'll really help them to understand your work history. I also would recommend that people not list their field work within its own area listed as field work. If you want reviewers to focus on your clinical experience, just list it as such. Include the populations, the caseload, and the productivity standards you were expected to meet, along with any other outside responsibilities. If you're applying for a job with a specific population, review the patients that you previously had with this condition and list those within the descriptions for that position. Next, let's look at Jane's professional memberships. Include a description of your role in the organization if it was beyond just being a member. Consider adding any conferences that you attended from this organization or any continuing education opportunities you completed with their groups. That about sums it up for Jane. Next, let's look at John Doe's opportunities for improvement. Let's first start with giving his feedback in the order of importance. Now, some of these things get pretty nitpicky, so that's why I made sure to actually put the most important things first, and then it kind of goes down into getting more and more picky. This was mentioned with Jane's application as well, but make sure to add a description to each experience listed. Focus on the areas that overlap with your role that you want, and then expand them with the descriptions. For those of us that really closely look at dates, it's very clear that John has a 3-year employment gap. If possible, under a different area of your resume, John should demonstrate his professional growth and/or involvement during this 3-year period. Things to consider would include volunteer experiences, any passion projects you completed, and any type of continuing education units you acquired or classes that you attended during this gap. You do not have to indicate to individuals why you had a gap of employment, and it's also illegal for individuals interviewing you to ask about family and marital status and things of that nature. So when you're looking to address why you had a gap of employment, because it is legal for people to ask generic questions regarding gaps of employment, you're going to want to have something on your resume that you can point back to that you were completing. People can get really creative with this. So if you have a question about that, please feel free to put a comment in the video comment section, and I'm happy to answer any questions. I also recommend that John describe certifications. When you're describing your certifications, include the credentialing agency, when your renewal date is, in any area of specialty that you have pertaining to their certification. So if you're someone that's just kind of acquiring certifications and not actually implementing any of them, you're gonna really wanna make sure that you brush up on what the clinical skills were that you mastered regarding that certification and how generic aspects of that have applied to the positions you've had. If you're listing these certificates, expect them to be part of the interview process. Similar to Jane's application, I recommend that John make his name and contact information more dominant than it currently is. He should also include details on the role of professional membership and the community involvement, just like Jane. And finally, I would say always make sure that you have references who are actually available upon request. Notify these references, ask for the permission to actually be your reference, and then inform them on what role you're going for. Remember to always select references who have relevant information to the role that you're going for, and always consider how well that they'll do being interviewed by the interviewer. If you have a CI with poor interpersonal skills, perhaps they shouldn't be listed as somebody on your reference list. I can't tell you how many times a candidate has supplied me with their references, and I've called them only to find out that the reference was surprised that that individual applied for the job, or also they didn't exactly give a glowing recommendation. Of all the people that I've interviewed over the last 3 years and talked to their references, I did have one reference that actually explicitly told me not to hire the individual and gave examples of why. And I'm sure that that individual that submitted their application had no clue that that's what that their reference would have stated. So you're gonna really wanna know the people that you're listing as your references. Just don't go with anyone. Finally, let's look at Amy Lamb's CV and other considerations. So as noted previously, your resume or CV should be altered for the role that you're applying for. Your CV should change over time. Your name, credentials, and contacts should be dominant. Make sure to craft your resume or CV in a way that highlights your strengths. If significant edits occur to your resume, make sure to truncate it. You'll see this a lot in Amy Lamb's CV. She'll actually state things over different sections that say last 5 years or only relevant topics listed. Make sure that you're just indicating whatever your edits are, and then if necessary, bring your full CV to the interview or have that able to be supplied. All right, let's end this video by reviewing the formatting basics for your resume. Remember to keep your text formal. Try to avoid using Comic Sans or some other type of font that's distracting visually. You want to make sure that your resume looks formal, and using some type of artsy font is not necessarily going to do that. The next comment is kind of an odd one, but consider using only one space after your period when you are typing. Evidently, individuals that were trained and went through schooling and had their kind of education for typing were either taught to use one space after a period or 2 spaces after a period. So I was part of the 2-space group. So pretty much everyone from mid to late 80s onward were educated regarding only including one space after your period, and all of the rest of us were using 2. So if you want to look like you're more recent and in the know, 1 period will do that. Consider consistent formatting. Make sure that if you're justifying things to one side, that this is consistent throughout the doc. Or if you're maybe using your dates 3 or 4 tabs over, make sure that that remains consistent throughout your document. Always PDF your document. When you're saving it as a Word and submitting it into a portal, the portal might distort the Word document, or when it gets opened, your formatting may be lost. The next one also goes into this, which is never allow LinkedIn, Career.com, Monsters.com, or Monster.com, or any of the other sites for aggregating open job positions to automatically format your resume for you and submit on your behalf. Whenever I've gotten these resumes, the system or the portal that our company uses has a lot of trouble opening these docs, and it also looks quite awkward, or large chunks of information will be missing. It is annoying, I will say, I've been there, but do go into that company's portal and submit all that information yourself manually. For those of you that might not have saved a document in PDF before, and this might sound obvious to those of us that have done it quite frequently, but Your computer has the capacity to do that. Just open up your Save As, and the first bar will be the name of your document, and below it is where that dot, and then if it's docs or doc or .pdf, that's where you get that. It changes the file format. So you just go Save As, make sure that your file is the same name, and then the second bar you're going to actually drop down and select PDF. Now, if you truly don't have the capacity to save something as a PDF on your computer, you can always use a format like Google and use Google Docs, and then you can save your Google Doc as a PDF. So that's kind of a workaround if you don't have those types of programs. That does it for the resume basics that I'm going to review today. If you have any questions or you want someone to review your resume before you supply it to an employer, I'm happy to do that. I'm sure many other people through the GOTA would be happy to help you as well. I encourage you to comment in the video comment section below, and let me know if you want any other interview or resume topics covered. Thank you.